everyone, and welcome to History Club for July of 2022. And today our topic will be ghost ships and shipwrecks of the Carolinas. And if you're interested in learning more on this topic, there's a book I'd like to recommend. It's called Ship of Blood. It's about an incident on the Harry A. Berwind not long after the turn from the 19th to the 20th century, and it's by Charles Odom, who grew up right here in Sanford. And if you'd like to know more, you can go to our YouTube page, and he gave a presentation here, which is up there, where you can find it. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest for today. And our special guest today is Leslie Leonard. She is the Curator of Education at the Museum of the Cape Fear. So I'll let Leslie come up and give us her presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Like Jordan said, I'm Leslie Leonard. I'm the Curator of Education at the Museum of the Cape Fear in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Jordan invited me here today to talk to you about ghost ships and shipwrecks of the Carolina coast in connection with your Oceans of Possibilities program you have going on at the museum. Let's see if this will just move forward. Yes. So the Museum of the Cape Fear Historical Complex is a state-run regional history museum. We're located in Fayetteville, and as you can see on this little pop-out county region, we cover the southeastern part of North Carolina, which is a little bit of the coast and mostly the sand hills. Just gonna move this out of it's right in front of your face. So while the topic of ghost ships and shipwrecks isn't something we typically talk about at the museum, I could not pass by the opportunity as a historian to research something that was new to me, but you guys will see I've got lots of notes here that I'll be reading, because also as a historian, I don't want to give anybody false information. But I had a lot of fun looking at something that was a little bit outside of my typical wheelhouse. But because I work in the same department as North Carolina Maritime Museums, I was able to reach out to several of my colleagues to get information from them rather than just starting from scratch. So I reached out to those at Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum and the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport, and they were gracious enough to provide me with a lot of the images and material that I was able to put in this slideshow today. All right, ghost ships and ghost stories. As a historian, I don't have much to tell you about ghost ships. I'm trained to look at historical tangible evidence and draw conclusions from that. And there just isn't any tangible evidence of ghost ships. But I would be remiss if I didn't share some famous North Carolina ghost stories with you. So this is one ship we're going to talk about. This is the Carol A. Deering, built in Maine, as you can see on this slide, wrecked in North Carolina. So here's how the tale goes. On January 28, 1921, the Carol A. Deering was spotted under sail from a lightship south of Wilmington. Shortly after, the ship slammed onto the Diamond Shoals, and I'll explain what the Diamond Shoals are in a little bit, off of Hatteras Island. When the Coast Guards were finally able to venture to the ship, the only form of life that greeted them was a six-toed cat, and all of the lifeboats were gone. All of the signs of life left seemed eerie and rushed. Food was left on the galley stove, clothing was left in lockers, boots were in the captain's quarters, and it seemed like everybody just vanished into thin air. The case was so mysterious that at least 5 government agencies, including the Coast Guard and the FBI, investigated the cause while families were just left to pray for an answer. The earliest explanation was that perhaps hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean caused the crew to abandon the ship at sea and take the lifeboats to safety. But the only setback to this is that when the Deering was found on the shoals, it was in good condition. The Bath, North Carolina Daily Times reported in June of 1921 that they believe the Deering was raped by pirates and the crew killed. Another explanation cited that papers found in a Russian communist office in New York City called for members to seize U.S. ships. And at the same time the Deering was discovered, there were 3 other ships that had vanished, leading to that speculation of either pirates or Russians. Now, over a century later, there's still no answer to what happened to the crew of the Deering. Searches along the eastern seaboard have never resulted in any recovery of bodies or evidence of those ships. So locals eventually salvaged parts of the ship, and the Coast Guard blew up the remains to prevent any type of navigation hazards on the coast. But some say when the water is low at Hatteras, you can see parts of the ship speaking or poking up through the sand. The ship has been named one of the greatest maritime mysteries. Today, the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum has artifacts including the ship's bell, but all other that is left is certain mystery. So the only fact here is that the descendant of the 6-toed cat can sometimes be found in the Hatteras ferry docks, which really made me want to go visit Hatteras and see if I could come across a 6-toed cat. How many have visited the battleship out in Wilmington? There are also tales of the ghost of the kind that come from one of North Carolina's most famous ships. So this is off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina right now. It's an old World War II battleship. It's been said that it's a site of paranormal activity. The ship is over 700 feet long. It's pretty enormous when you step on the decks. And it can be a little bit chilling when you walk through the freezing corridors. I'm not one that has believed in the paranormal, so take with this what you may. But many visitors have claimed to see a blonde-haired man on the boat. One night watchman told a story of checking out the boat to see if there were any visitors left aboard, and he felt somebody touch his shoulders. He looked and he heard footsteps on the other side, so he shined his flashlight and he saw a ghostly apparition of a blonde-haired man. But I don't know if that's true. Other guests have said that they perhaps have seen faces in the portals when they're standing or when they leave the ship, but again, I don't know. Shipwrecks, on the other hand, shipwrecks I can tell you about. They've been well documented and well researched. So off the coast of North Carolina, there are over 2,000 documented shipwrecks. Many sources have lots of different numbers. I've read up to 5,000, but this is what Graveyard of the Atlantic tells us, and since they're in my department, I trust those folks. But this is just a portion of a map. You can kind of see all of these little spots here, up and down the coast. It shows you those are all indicative of a shipwreck. I did find the Dare County, North Carolina website has a really neat interactive map that I probably spent way too much time looking at while I was researching this. But if you guys are interested in seeing where some of these shipwrecks are in the ocean, I recommend looking at that website. And again, that's through Dare County, North Carolina. It's a government website. So one of the first shipwrecks to be recorded in North Carolina was this English ship, Tiger. The Tiger was actually a participant in Sir Walter Raleigh's Roanoke voyages, and this one grounded on a sandbar in the Ocracoke Inlet. Chronicling the event, one of the explorers described the natural threat of the coastal North Carolina, and I'm going to paraphrase his Old English because it would probably make no sense to half of you. Our fleet struck aground, and the Tiger took a beating on the shoals for hours. We were all at hazard of becoming castaways. So a wide variety of ships rest in the waters of the North Carolina coast. We'll go through some of them. I found some great pictures, so I had to figure out a way to share them. So tugs, steamers, submarines, tankers, freighters, and many, many more. So any type of ship or boat you can think of, you can find off the coast of North Carolina. So there are many reasons for the variety of ships that rest in the waters off North Carolina, including nature, war, piracy, and human error. But let's talk about these sand known as shoals. You can hear those terms being interchanged. The diamond shoals are on the outer banks. You can see right around Cape Hatteras, marked by the dots. And these are they're ever-changing in formation and in depth, which is why it's hard for sailors to be able to navigate around them. And they extend for miles in many different directions. Again, that can vary. But once a ship gets stuck on a shoal, it becomes impossible to get off of. It's easy to get caught, difficult to leave. So why navigate so closely if you know there's going to be trouble? So in the 19th century, there was a term called coasting, and that just meant sailors would sail along the coast. And that was because it was a simple, reliable form of navigation. If you could have a good eye on where the coast was, you knew where you could go, and the shore would be easily within reach if there was any type of danger at sea. Along the North Carolina coast, and you can even see here by some of the words I have on my slide, that two currents flow along the North Carolina coast. You have the Labrador current that flows south from north, and it flows pretty close to the North Carolina shore. And then there's the Gulf Stream that flows north, and if a ship can hit the Gulf Stream, it really kind of speeds up the trek they're trying to make. But oftentimes, winds or storms coming in from the ocean can push these ships a little bit closer to shore than intended. And once you're on the shoals, there's very little you can do. So hurricanes are obviously one huge reason why there's such a vast number of shipwrecks. This one, the Priscilla, remember this, we'll talk about the Priscilla in a little bit when we talk about the rescue of some of the men. But North Carolina hurricane season is still a very real hazard in the Atlantic Ocean. Several threaten to fall on shore each year in the state. So that is one reason why ships would have wrecked. Piracy. Piracy is another historic reason for shipwrecks. I know you guys talked about pirates last month. Pirates targeted heavy trade routes. Remember I told you with the Gulf Stream and the Labrador Current, lots of trade routes outside of North Carolina. The Outer Banks gave an opportunity for pirates to sit and wait for the trade to happen, and then they could hit their targets. Pirates were known to quickly board a ship, plunder a ship, wreck it, and then they could get away quickly on smaller boats and hide in the shallower water where they couldn't be followed. So war was a contribution to the shipwrecks of the North Carolina coast. This is something I learned. In World War II alone, approximately 86 Allied vessels and 4 U-boats were sunk in the graveyard of the Atlantic, which brought a new nickname, Torpedo Junction. First time I've heard that one. Human error, as with many things, is also a contributing cause of shipwrecks. This one here, the F.W. Abrams, I've got a story about that, so I'm going to read my notes very closely to make sure I get all of my facts right. So this one was hit by Allied mines after veering off course. So on June 2nd, 1942, the Abrams left Aruba, traveling unarmed and alone, carrying over 90,000 barrels of oil with the destination of New York City. On June 10th, the Abrams sought refuge in the minefield that had been created to offer Allied vessels safety from German U-boats patrolling Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The Abrams was escorted into the minefield by the Coast Guard and sat anchor until about 4 o'clock in the morning, when another patrol car returned to secure their safe exit out of the minefield. During the transition out of the minefield, the Abrams lost sight of the guide boat because of a heavy rain, and they made the decision to change course and head out to sea. After making the change, an explosion rocked the ship from starboard at 6:40 a.m. So they drifted northward. A tankard was hit in the pump room 30 minutes later when another explosion rocked the bow. The captain and crew believed they were under attack by a submarine, and at 7:40 on June 11th, the captain ordered the crew to abandon the ship. Of the 36-person crew, all were safely rescued and taken to Ocracoke Island, North Carolina, and only one sailor sustained injuries. The captain remained in Ocracoke for a few days following the incident, hoping the vessel could be salvaged, but it slowly sank beneath the waves, finally submerging on June 15th. So believe it or not, there are some positive aspects that came from the number of shipwrecks, including improvements in life-saving efforts and the building of additional stations along the coast. And many residents of the Outer Banks, like these gentlemen here, were able to demonstrate courage and heroism as they offered to help survivors and victims of shipwrecks. Here's one such man. It's a surfman, Erasmus. He went by the name Erasmus. Erasmus Midget was a surfman in the United States Life-Saving Service of North Carolina and is remembered for his heroic rescue of the crew of the ship Priscilla. Remember, we saw the Priscilla that was brought in by the hurricane. In fact, Midget followed other family members by joining the U.S. Life-Saving Service, and for over 90 years, the Midgets had offered their services to the Life-Saving Service, and between the years of 1876 and 1972, 7 of the Midgets were awarded life-saving medals, earning them the nickname the Mighty Midgets. But for some background, the United States Life-Saving Service, so the USLSS, was created to protect ship crews and their cargoes along the coast. It started out as volunteer-based, but became established as a federal agency in 1871. Due to the number of shipwrecks along the North Carolina coast, the life-saving stations were crucial to the state. The Gull Station is the one that Mr. Erasmus worked at. And a typical station crew consisted of 1 head keeper and 6 lifesavers. Training would consist of a variety of drills so that the crew could be prepared for any type of situation. The crew would watch the ocean from their watchtower, or they could go up and down the beach in their designated spot, either on horseback or on foot, to look out and see if there were any ships in trouble. So around 3 a.m., this is a very dedicated job if you're going to be up at 3 a.m. I can't remember the last time I saw 3 a.m. On August 18, 1889, Erasmus was patrolling on horseback. He was heading south, and he noticed there was debris in the water, which was a sign of a shipwreck nearby. So he rode a little further, and he saw more debris, and then he heard shouting and screaming. And through the darkness, Erasmus saw several people hanging onto a wrecked vessel. So the Priscilla was sailing from Baltimore, Maryland to Brazil when it was caught in a hurricane, causing the ship to run 3 miles south of the Gull Station. So Erasmus was pretty far south of where his home station was. When the ship ran aground, the captain, his wife, and son, along with 2 crew members, unfortunately, were carried out to sea due to the violent waves. So only 10 crew members remained. And because Midget was so far from the life-saving station, he thought he'd go ahead and see what he could do on his own. So after encouraging some of the men to jump into the water and swim to shore, there were 3 men that were too exhausted to swim, so Erasmus went out and brought each one of those 3 men back individually, single-handedly saving a total of 10 men from death. So for his heroism, Erasmus was awarded the Gold Life-Saving Medal by the Secretary of Treasury. It's a pretty amazing story how he rescued those guys. Got another amazing story for you. So this is the rescue of the Es Newman. This was a remarkable life-saving event. On the night of October 11, 1886, a 3-mast schooner, Es Newman, ran aground somewhere near the P Island station, which again is another one of those North Carolina stations, in another hurricane. The winds were so bad that night, and the storm was so bad, the winds exceeded 100 miles per hour, and it was said that all the way down to the Pamlico Sound, it was just awash. The way it was described is that you could barely even see the island. The winds and rains were so bad. So Keeper Richard Etheridge, who's the man on the far left, he was the first black life-saving station keeper in U.S. history, and his crew was all black. And under his leadership, this is how the rescue went. Now, the ocean was too violent for them to take out their surf boat, which you'll see in this picture here, just a smaller boat to get out to the wreckage. So the crew manned the only other rescue equipment they had, a beach cart, which is what it sounds like, with a Lyle gun, which is essentially a cannon that will shoot out rope and able to help with those life-saving efforts, and a breeches buoy, which is like what it sounds like, this picture here. It's a buoy with some shorts in it, so you can sit in there and be dragged to safety. So when they pulled their cart out and reached the bottom of the ramp, it immediately just starts going under ocean wash and burying in the sand. So with what seemed like superhuman effort, the 6 surfmen pushed and pulled this two-ton cart to try to get it closer to where the wreckage was. And when they finally got there, and this was quoted, the surfmen heard from the ship what was later officially described in the records as the voice of gladdened hearts. I can't imagine how terrifying that was to be on a ship with 100-mile-per-hour winds. So exhausted and desperate, the surfmen attempted to mount up the sands below the water so they could put this Lyle gun, that cannon, on. And the 200-pound cannon just sank. It immediately sank. So they were out of all rescue methods they had on hand. But the keeper, Etheridge, he immediately proposed a crazy plan. He asked for 2 volunteers, which 2 immediately stepped forward, and asked the men to tie rope around their waist, tie themselves to each other, and then a 3rd rope the men on the shore would hang on to. And with these 2 men anchored to each other and the remaining crew on the beach, they would carry another line with them, swim out to the ship, and bring in 1 person at a time. So why do you think they tied 2 men together? In case one of them drowned. They wanted to make sure that no man was left behind, and they could bring in one of their crewmen for a proper burial. So they went out, they reached the broken ship, and miraculously, they saved everybody. They were finished by 9 p.m., but they were still a long way from safety. They were a ways away from the rescue station. The rescue finally concluded by 1 o'clock in the morning when they all reached the island station, and all of the survivors were given food, water, and dry clothing, which is something that was on hand in all rescue stations. So normally, rescues that involve such extraordinary bravery and heroics, people were rewarded with life-saving medals, like we saw Rasmus get. You could either get silver for extraordinary bravery or gold for extreme bravery. I don't know who differentiates between extraordinary and extreme, but I think these men, they demonstrated extreme bravery. But due to prejudice, they did not receive their medals. In 1995, a student by the name of Katie Burkhart, a 14-year-old North Carolina student, had chosen the P Island Rescue Station as her social studies report. So she did a little research, and she was amazed that so little was known about these men. And she was really horrified to discover that they never received any awards for their heroics. So she wrote, at the time, North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms. She wrote President Bill Clinton. And she realized as the 100th anniversary was approaching, she really needed to get something done. So spearheaded and with help from Rear Admiral Stephen Roshan on October 11, 1996, the descendants of the crew were finally awarded the U.S. Coast Guard life-saving gold medals in a fitting formal ceremony. You guys want to learn more about shipwrecks? Don't ask me. I'm not the expert. There are experts, and good news, you guys are in a library, so I know of a perfect place where you can find books about shipwrecks. But you can also go to the places where experts work. This is a picture of the USS Huron. Now this is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This is a shipwreck that you can visit. In 1991, it was designated as this North Carolina's first historic shipwreck preserve. It's now called the Heritage Dive Site. This wreck is located in Nags Head, North Carolina. So you can actually, there's a small exhibit and a gazebo right by the Bladen Street beach access. The Huron was only about 200 yards from the beach, and you can actually go and dive and check out the shipwreck yourself. During summer months, buoys mark the bow and stern of the wreck. Divers and snorkelers can visit. You cannot collect artifacts from the site. It's prohibited by law. I do not encourage you to go and get items, but go and look at it. And if you want to know more, this is an image of our graveyard at the Atlantic Museum. It's a North Carolina run museum. And then there is also the Outer Banks Research Center in Manteo, North Carolina. It's where you can find a lot of great information on shipwrecks. You're not going to find a whole lot on ghost ships, because as I said, there's not a lot of data on that. But that's what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much. And I'll field any questions if I can.
And where is that Museum of the Atlantic? Is that in Manteo, Nags Head, on the Outer Banks?
The Graveyard of the Atlantic is at Hatteras.
Okay.
It's in Hatteras, North Carolina. So that's one of our maritime museums. There's another maritime museum in Southport. And then we have the Museum of the Albemarle. It's in Elizabeth City, so a little further north. They're great resources, good people. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.